Order.
The Draft Official Controls Amendment Regulations 2024.
I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister Zeichner.
Thank you very much, Ms Harrison. It's always a pleasure to serve with you. And Chair, can I wish you a happy new year and to all members and officials present. And I beg to move that the House approves the Official Controls Amendment Regulations 2024, which were laid before the House on the 19th of November. Now, as I'm sure members will have noticed looking through the detail of this, there's a lot of detail to it, and you'll be relieved to hear that I'm not intending to go through it line by line, but I'll try and cover the most significant elements in it. Building on the work introduced by the previous government, we're implementing a global risk-based import model for sanitary and phytosanitary goods, known as the Border Target Operating Model. And this aims to deliver a streamlined approach to import, which protects public plant and animal health and minimises friction at the border. And the instrument uses powers conferred by the retained EU law, Revocation and Reform Act 2023, known as the Rule Act. The changes implemented by this instrument fall into three main categories. The first category of measures provides a long-term legislative framework for sanitary and phytosanitary controls already introduced, but beyond the reliance on temporary powers, such as the transitional staging period. For example, by amending the definition of an official certificate to include digital documents, facilitating fully electronic and digital import documentation, and by expanding the definition of documentary check to include remote examination or by automated means. And this means we're making it possible to remove the requirement to carry out documentary checks on all imports, allowing the frequency of checks to be based on risk, and also providing the power to allow for inland border control posts for reasons other than geographical constraints, in addition to giving government the power to determine whether to designate allowing greater control to align border control facilities and resources with biosecurity, trade and food security priorities. Now, the second category of measures allows for conditions governing the import of animals and animal products to be updated administratively in response to risk to uphold our obligations to protect biosecurity and public health while facilitating trade. Competent authorities, devolved governments, the Food Standards Authority and DEFRA together will be able to amend and manage biosecurity controls in response to changing risks. Additionally, animals and animal products can be categorised based on risk, with the ability to exempt low-risk categories from unnecessary checks, aligning our animal control measures with plants and plant products. The third category of measures allow policies which reduce burdens to be delivered in the future and allows the extension of policies to non-EU goods. These future policies would require further legislative change to implement. It's proposed that we have the powers in place now to provide for flexibility in the future and ensure the border can be adapted over time in response to risk. However, there are two policies which do have impact from the date this instrument comes into force. Firstly, diagnostic testing of plants and plant products can be undertaken at a border control post, instead of such tests needing to take place at official laboratories. And this is a positive development which will significantly reduce the release time of certain perishable goods. The second policy is the use of enhanced enforcement powers to require and pursue full cost recovery at the common user charge for goods entering through government-run border control posts. And this is vital to ensure full cost recovery of the operating costs and ensure businesses pay charges for their import activity. These changes will have no impact on the Windsor framework and do not bring additional checks in on the west coast of Great Britain, and the Scottish and Welsh governments consented to these amendments. Now, upon laying the instrument, we received a submission from Friends of the Earth. They shared concerns about checks, or they raised concerns about checks being made away from border control points, about frequency of checks being based on risk, and how misdeclaration would be handled, performance monitoring, and queried whether we were acting within our powers under the Rule Act. We responded to them, explaining that this instrument only allows provision to be made for documentary identity and physical controls to be undertaken at places other than border control posts or control points, and that we have robust evidence-based risk modelling measures to categorise SPS into categories based on the inherent risk the product poses to animal, food, biosecurity and public health. For animals and animal products, the default documentary rate remains at 100%, and whilst low-risk goods do not require certification or routine checks under the new approach, we are able to detain these goods for checks based on intelligence. By next year, we will have review cycles of risk categorisation in place, and we have existing surveillance programmes to ensure emerging risks are detected and dealt with in a timely manner. Finally, the Rule Act is being used within its powers to replace provisions under assimilated law inherited from the European Union to create new provisions that achieve the same or similar objectives. Now, the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee asked about the use of administrative rather than legislative powers in other areas of import controls, and we explained that while powers exist to control imports through statutory instruments, administrative powers are required to ensure changes to import conditions can be made rapidly in response to emerging biosecurity and food safety risks in trading partners approved to export to Great Britain. I think that's a really important point. The amendment reflects and builds on changes already made since the United Kingdom left the European Union to refine our listing procedures for imports of animals and animal products in ways that provide the flexibility and responsiveness needed to protect biosecurity, but also facilitate trade. And the committee noted DEFRA's explanation and were reassured about the use of administrative rather than legislative powers in this specific policy area. So the government is committed to removing trade barriers, including through seeking to negotiate an SPS agreement with the EU, but this will take time. This instrument is a necessary step to implement the policy the industry has been preparing for and ensure biosecurity is maintained between now and any new agreement taking effect. Ms Harris, these regulations will ensure that controls already in place are enduring, implementing a responsive, risk-based approach to the border, protecting the United Kingdom from emerging pests and disease, while supporting businesses with processes that are as simple and effective as possible.
The question is that this committee has considered the Draft Official Controls Amendment Regulations 2024. Shadow Minister Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Ms Harris, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I note that the Minister made reference to the fact that this is a delegated legislation which is following on from the work that the previous Conservative administration brought forward, which is why us, as the official opposition, will be supporting the regulatory changes being brought forward by the government today. It is right that we continue to review and update the regulations surrounding our customs and border enforcement, and I welcome some of the reductions in the red tape that this legislation represents. This designated legislation protects biosecurity and trade between Great Britain and third countries by making sure that SPS controls can be applied to goods entering Great Britain. Whilst the control of our withdrawal from the European Union gives us a powerful tool, one is quite right that we utilise this in full. We must be careful to ensure that going forward that it is used to the benefit of British farmers, horticulturalists and the wider public, and this designated legislation significantly does that, whilst also reducing the risks to do with plant health and biosecurity. That is why I and other colleagues on the official opposition will continue to hold the government to account in delivering on our food security targets and our biosecurity obligations, and we support this DL this morning. Thank you.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regulation 2017-625 is something that goes to the very heart of the territorial integrity of this United Kingdom. Because under the Protocol Windsor Framework, Northern Ireland is subject to all its controls. Our High Court in Belfast, as endorsed by the Court of Appeal, has said that the effect of this regulation is to make Northern Ireland the entry point to the EU. Now, the constitutional significance of that is immense, because it means that when you leave Great Britain and go to the other part of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, you are in fact entering, when it comes to all the laws pertaining to goods, the EU. You're entering their single market. You're entering under their regime of their customs code. Hence, the EU's insistence on the REC border to distinguish and to give effect to the fact that under this regulation, when you move from GB to Northern Ireland, you're entering EU territory. So Regulation 2017 of 625 is fundamental to the people I represent in Northern Ireland, because it puts in lights the fact that we are no longer a full, proper part of the United Kingdom. And what the Minister has outlined today, in part, illustrates that. Because if the committee were to look at Regulation 14 within these regulations, you will see that at 14b, it expressly talks about consignments entering not the United Kingdom, entering Great Britain. Why is that? Because the point I've made, that Northern Ireland is now deemed to be EU territory in these terms, and therefore this government and its predecessor, under the Windsor Framework, having surrendered those powers to the EU under this regulation, cannot provide for the entry of consignments of goods to the United Kingdom. They can only provide for the entry of consignment of goods to Great Britain. And where are those entry points? Well, one of them, of course, is that which divides crossing the Irish Sea from Northern Ireland. So what this regulation does, it underscores the fact that we have partitioned our United Kingdom with a foreign regulatory border. And Regulation 14b is reflective of the fact that all this Parliament can now do under the Windsor Framework is make regulations for consignments of goods entering GB. And consignments of goods entering GB have to be subject, because they're coming from EU territory, to checks, documentary or inspection or whatever. Now, when it was first sold to the people of Northern Ireland, the Windsor Framework was presented as only affecting the flow of goods from GB to Northern Ireland. Now we see that, in effect, it is equally going to apply the flow of goods from Northern Ireland to GB. So where are those checks going to be? I'd like to hear from the Minister. Where are the checks going to be on consignments coming from a part of the United Kingdom into the mainland of the United Kingdom? Can the Minister tell us where those checks are going to be? Which comes, of course, on top of the question, the quite audacious suggestion that there should be checks at all for bringing goods from one part of the United Kingdom to another. So I do think that this is a regulation which once again puts the spotlight on how far my part of the United Kingdom has been pushed out of the United Kingdom, pushed into and under EU control, and in consequence, the Parliament of the United Kingdom is now unable or unwilling to legislate for the passage of goods from one part of the United Kingdom to another. And that's what you've been asked to do here today. And I, for one, do not think that is in any sense constitutional, political, or economic acceptable. Thank you.
Can I just point out, Mr. McCarthy, that the you is me.
Sir.
The you. Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for the contributions that members have made, and very grateful for the opposition spokesperson's support. I'd welcome his positive response. This is important work, and I think it's a sensible approach that is being taken. I also hear the the honourable gentleman's points, the member from North Antrim. What I would be able to reassure him is that essentially this is what we're proposing this morning is absolutely consistent with all the commitments already set out in the Windsor Framework, including continuing to guarantee that qualifying Northern Ireland goods will have unfettered access to the Great British market. I'm happy for him to give way.
How can there be unfettered access from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, as yes, in the words of the Windsor Framework, is assured? How can there be if at the same time Regulation 14 is providing for checks on goods coming into Great Britain, which must include goods coming from Northern Ireland? How can there be unfettered access if they are subject to checks?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for the points that he makes. He will appreciate these are a complicated set of circumstances that we are trying to resolve and make work. This is a genuine attempt to make this system work for everybody's benefit. And I appreciate the complex issues he raises, but I do not believe that the measures we're bringing forward this morning make any substantial difference to that. So on that basis, Chair, these regulations will be removing the reliance on temporary measures, implementing a responsive risk-based imports approach to protect the United Kingdom from emerging pests and diseases while supporting businesses with processes that are as simple and effective as possible, and I beg to move.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft Official Controls Amendment Regulations 2024. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.